I'm Darrell West, Vice President of Governance Studies at the Brookings Institution, and I would like to welcome you to the 8th Annual John Hazen White Manufacturing Forum. And we are webcasting this event live, so a warm welcome to our viewers from across the country. And we have a Twitter feed set up at hashtag USMFG. That's USMFG, so if you'd like to post any comments during the forum, feel free to do so. This forum is supported by John Hazen White. John and his wife Liz and sons John and Ben and their wives are here. So I want to thank each of them for the financial support that have been provided. This enables the independent work that our scholars do, and we are very grateful for the help that you have provided. Last week, we released the results of a national survey examining public attitudes towards U.S. manufacturing. We asked a number of questions regarding people's feelings about manufacturing, their concerns about the future, barriers to success, whether young people should go into the field, the impact of automation, and views about President Trump's 25% trade tariffs. And we'll be discussing those topics today and considering ways to move forward into the future. We have put together a distinguished set of experts to help us think about manufacturing. To my left is David Cicilline, who is a congressman from Rhode Island. He was elected in 2010, and he already has risen to a leadership position within the House. He serves as chair of the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. If you turn on the television, you will see him, seems like every day now. I see him regularly, maybe every other day. He also chairs the House Antitrust Subcommittee, which held a major hearing yesterday on the tech sector, so it's been a very busy week for you. And then from a manufacturing standpoint, he has been a leading advocate for the Make It in America agenda, which hopes to strengthen U.S. manufacturing. To my right is Molly Kinder, who is the Senior Advisor for the National Network of Workers, and Technology at the New America Foundation. She has undertaken insightful work on how technology is affecting the workforce in local communities across the country and what we can do to help workers deal with the transition that is coming. Molly also will be joining the Brookings Institution in October as a David Rubenstein Fellow. So we look forward to welcoming you to our scholar list then. And to my other right is John Hazen White, who is the CEO of Taco Comfort Solutions, which is based in Cranston, Rhode Island. He has been in the forefront of worker retraining and helping his employees gain new skills. And he also serves as a Brookings trustee. So I want to start by reviewing a couple of key findings from our national survey, which polled over 2,000 adult internet users between June 16 and June 18. And we ask about the current situation in regard to manufacturing and what people should think about the future. And what we found was a good news, bad news situation. The good news is that 58% of Americans see manufacturing as vital to the U.S. economy, which of course it is, because that sector employs over 11 million workers and generates over $5 trillion in economic activity each year. But the bad news is only 17% are very confident in the future of manufacturing. And people cited a number of barriers in terms of government regulations, poorly trained workers, high taxes, and high energy costs. So I'm going to start with Congressman Cicilline and just ask, how worried are you about the future of manufacturing, and what do we need to do in order to have a robust manufacturing sector?
Well, thank you again for including me on the panel. It's great to be with the White family and at Brookings. I'm very optimistic about the future of manufacturing in this country. I was very pleased to see in that report that the public perception of the importance of manufacturing was very high. That has not always been the case, so I think that's very good news. And I think one of the reasons that you see lower numbers about kind of the future of manufacturing is because I think there's a lot of anxiety about automation and about technology and about workforce capabilities. So I think one of the most important things we can do is stay relentlessly focused on workforce training. I mean, this is something that TACO does extraordinarily well, but understanding that as manufacturing becomes more sophisticated, more high-tech, involving a high level of skill, that we need to train and prepare a workforce for that kind of advanced manufacturing. And I think that's an area where we have a lot of work to do. I think focusing on apprenticeship opportunities so that people who are interested in transitioning into manufacturing have an opportunity to do that. Support the maker movement, which is kind of a great movement by young people, particularly about making things again. I think strengthening our Buy America provisions and modernizing them so that we really use the purchasing power of the United States to support American manufacturing. And I think also continuing to create the Make it in America manufacturing communities that really encourage partnerships between the public sector, the private sector, the foundation world, higher education, to help build manufacturing ecosystems, and doing that in a very intentional way. That those are some ways that we can support the growth of manufacturing in our country.
Okay, terrific. So Molly, I know you've done considerable work on automation and technology. In our survey, we asked about automation, and 64% said that they expect a lot of automation in manufacturing 10 years from now. So how do you think automation is going to affect the workforce? And based on the work you've been doing at New America, what should we be doing?
Well, Daryl, it's a great question. I read the survey with great interest. There's two projects I'm working on that really resonate with this work that Daryl has been leading. The first is that in my role at New America, we've been going into communities across the country and bringing together stakeholders to talk about how work is changing, how is automation going to impact jobs in those communities, and what to do about it. One of those communities that we've spent some time in is the Elkhart and Goshen region of Indiana, which, as we know, is a very heavy manufacturing region. It's the sort of home of RV production. And spending some time there, it's very clear the importance of manufacturing jobs in people's lives. This is very much related to this work I'm leading on interviewing the workers themselves who are in the jobs that stand to change the most. So I've just come back from several weeks in the field interviewing fast food workers, cashiers, retail salespeople, clerical workers, to understand better how their job fits into their life, how they see it changing, what the future looks like, and what needs to be done. We didn't interview manufacturing workers. However, the survey fills in some of those pieces, and it resonates with a lot of the things we're finding. I was really struck by the survey responses, not just the 64% anticipating a lot of automation, but if you add in the people saying that there will be some automation, it was something like 75% of all the respondents. That's fact-based, that's actually factual, and I think everyone on these panels is going to agree. Automation is here, it's already been happening in the manufacturing sector, and it's going to continue in some of the same ways and also in some different ways. There's been a lot of reports talking about the future of work, predicting change in different sectors. Manufacturing and production is toward the top in almost all studies looking at how work is going to change over the next 20 years. Robots are getting better, cheaper, faster, multi-purpose. There's a lot of different ways that production can be automated, and it certainly will impact the manufacturing workforce. And one of the ways that really matters to me in my work is how is it going to impact the workers who have enjoyed and report feeling very satisfied by work that provides a stable middle-class lifestyle but doesn't require a college degree. And we've seen over the last several decades that middle of the wage spectrum, good, stable jobs that can provide for a family that don't require a college degree, manufacturing is one of them. This is something that stands to be at risk. So the jobs that are at most risk in manufacturing are the ones that have the least education requirements and the least skill. That leaves a very big question. So manufacturing has provided a middle class and stable opportunity for a lot of workers in a lot of communities. It's one that is valued by the workforce themselves. And as technology changes the factory floor and creates excellent new jobs that entail the technology itself, the skill level is going to move up in the factories. The need for skilled workers raises, and the need for lower skilled workers on the assembly line diminishes. And that leaves just a very big challenge. What can be done to make sure those workers can adapt to the way the factory is changing and the way manufacturing is changing? How can they be connected to the training that's going to help them move up that skill spectrum so they can connect to the excellent jobs that manufacturing will continue to generate. It's a big challenge, and I think it's one, in our conversations when we go into communities, it's never one area that needs to respond. It's not just the manufacturing sector that has to handle this. There's a role for the education sector, the public sector, the social sector. There really has to be a lot coming together. And I think one of the challenges is being able to look pretty clear-eyed into the future and see these changes coming. So I did find it quite striking that so many people responded that they did anticipate change was coming. I saw that in addition to that, most people still recommended manufacturing as a job toward the future. So I think that provides some optimism, but as the jobs themselves change, it's going to require really a multi-sectoral effort to make sure that the workforce that has benefited historically can continue to do so.
So, Johnny, you are on the front lines of manufacturing, and one of the interesting results in our survey was that 47% said they would encourage young people to go into manufacturing, 20% would not, and 35% were unsure. Now, in your family, you have two sons who have gone into the family business of manufacturing. Is there a future for young people in manufacturing?
Oh, I think a very exciting one. Manufacturing is transforming, and to all of your points, and David, yours. Manufacturing is transforming, you know, from I think what was probably viewed as old, dark, dirty, in a place where certainly, you know, the parents of my generation, meaning my parents' generation, were advocates for all of us to do better than they did, and so. There was pretty much an insistence on going to college and getting furthering your education to do better. But this is now becoming a part of what's happening in manufacturing. And I think, you know, this whole notion, it's very interesting to me because I've been talking about this in these forums for the last 5 years, I think, or 3 years, which is that I'm not certain that everybody needs to go to college. I tell this story every year, I think. There's a company in Wisconsin, someplace I believe, who the factory dominates the town, thousands of jobs. And with the baby boomer exodus, which is real, we're feeling this now with some intensity, actually. Baby boomer exodus is causing us to have to dig a little deeper for replacements. And a company like Takeo, we have a 0.5% turnover for the last 30 years. So finding new people is not something we've been doing regularly. So it's a challenge. But in this company in Wisconsin, as they were losing people, they decided they couldn't fill these jobs, and so they were just going to shut the factory and move to Mexico. The town and the company got together and figured out that the problem was the parents weren't allowing the kids in the high school to desire to become employed here. So they brought the kids in. They began to bust the kids in from the high school. And the kids saw what's real, which is all you're talking about, automation, robotics, you know, process improvement. It's fun stuff. I'm telling you, this is really exciting stuff. And the kids went home and said to the parents, I want to go there. So the next step was to bring the kids and the parents in to tour and see the place. And then, and this is brilliant, and I want to emulate this at Takeo so badly. This is something that I'm working on with our training people now. Not only did they bring these kids in after high school at, you know, $60,000 or $70,000, right? But they educated them. They provided the education. And we do that, right? So this is all a doable thing. So I think there is a future for manufacturing. I think it's an exciting one, and I think it will hold true to what we all know, which is that studies will show, I guess, that manufacturing is the greatest creator of wealth, right? And so, so we have and this country has the greatest minds for development, you know, for R&D, for everything we do. And look around the rest of the world. Look at Germany, look at Japan, look at these countries that have really prospered in the area of manufacturing. They've done it by improving. So the possibilities for us are absolutely real. I feel very strongly about that. Or I don't think I'd stay in it. Right?
Okay.
Because I don't like boring.
Okay.
Never have.
I've noticed that. So Congressman, you mentioned the importance of workforce training, and of course, there are a lot of worker retraining programs. It seems like many of them are not very successful. How can we do a better job of retraining workers, especially as we enter this digital world and people are going to need to upgrade their job skills?
Well, I think it's important to build upon what Johnny just said. I think, we lived in a country for a long time in which people were discouraged from thinking about a career in manufacturing. In fact, 10 or 15 years ago, if you came home as a high school student and said, Mom, Dad, I want to be a manufacturer, they probably were like, And I think that is beginning to change. And I think in part it's changing because, a bunch of things. The maker movement, the idea that actually today, in order to be successful in manufacturing, you need some additional skill set, some post-secondary education. So maybe parents feel like, oh, their kids are still getting an education because they are. So immediately after high school, they're both sometimes starting a career in manufacturing, but also going to a junior college or going to a trade or vocational school. So I think it's beginning to change, and I think what we can do is start in high school so that we have really serious investments in career and technical education. So young people who are good with their hands and good at making things are encouraged to develop those skills early on, not be seen as like the oldest, worst school in the system in the back. I was very proud when I was mayor of Providence, the newest, best school we had was the best career and technical academy in New England and had a longer waiting list than one of the best high schools in the city because young people deserve that. So making it a priority, lifting it up, and preventing teachers and principals from going into schools and saying, are you all kids, everyone going to go to college? Raise your hand, and suggesting that if you don't go to college, somehow you can't have a fulfilling life. So I think starting very early by valuing manufacturing, reminding people that you earn on average much more in a manufacturing job than a not manufacturing job. That remains the case, a little over $80,000 nationally. And making certain that we are speaking to employers. I mean, one of the great successes we've had in Rhode Island with Real Jobs Rhode Island is, for a long time, the federal government provided workforce training money, and a bunch of folks sat around the table and just, developed programs that they thought would respond to the challenges, in the workforce at the time, almost not speaking with employers. And I think what we've done in Rhode Island, which is really smart, is the governor has led an effort to listen to employers. Tell us exactly what you need so we can create a job training program to actually meet those needs, and with the assurance that when we're done, you're going to have a job for that person, which is where the name Real Jobs come from. So I think job training programs are important, but they have to be done right, where you're listening very carefully to the employers who are running the companies who have the jobs today to find out what do you need, so you're not just training somebody for a job you imagine will be there or a skill set that you think is valuable as a bureaucrat of a workforce training agency in a local or state government. So I do think that the skills gap is real. It's a place where we have to make real investments if we're going to be successful and to continue to be a leader in the world in terms of manufacturing and coming from a state where was the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution, as you know, Professor. We have to really stay with this and invest it in a smart way and be certain that we're building these public-private partnerships so that employers are helping to shape the workforce training that we're providing that will actually result in a real job for someone.
Okay. So building on that, Molly, you mentioned in your opening remarks that every sector is going to have to step up, but you specifically mentioned the education sector. So what is it that education needs to do, either in terms of K-12, universities, or some people, like Antoine has talked a lot about the role of community colleges in worker retraining. What do these different parts of the education system need to do?
So I'd answer that on two different ways, and just building on what the Congressman said, I think there's two challenges. One is, how do you build the pipeline now to create the new talent that matches the new reality in the future of manufacturing? So you need to attract folks with math skills and tech skills and interested in the post-secondary. So that's one challenge, is building the future pipeline. I think there's a separate challenge that's frankly a very challenging one, which is taking the existing workforce that we do have that are really benefiting from the jobs that they do have and repositioning them to meet the changing needs of the sector. And I think they're two very different challenges. You made the very good point that the education system needs to listen to the employers when it comes to providing that education for the future workforce. I would argue that on the second case, the employer should really listen to the workforce to understand their constraints, what makes them tick, it is very hard for somebody in the middle of their career with a busy family, a demanding job, to find the space to retrain and upskill on their spare time or even on the job. It's not an easy thing to do. This is a theme we're seeing in all of our interviews with all different types of workers. It's really easy to get on a panel and say, oh, well, everything's changing. All we have to do is just magically help all workers reinvent themselves. That's actually a very tall order. It's very hard to do, especially as people are older, they're busy into their careers. Some people, frankly, want stability. That is what we're hearing over and over for a lot of workers. The primary thing they want is stability and the lack of change, and they're going to be facing change, and they're going to be facing the need to really adapt. We're finding a mismatch, not particularly in the manufacturing sector, but to the extent some employers are providing educational benefits or some training to their workforce in the anticipation of change, I don't find it very human-centered. I don't feel that it's actually taking into account the real lives, the perspectives, the daily schedules, the childcare needs, the inclination to study or not, that being tied to specific jobs where people can see, if I invest this time and energy, I can see where this is taking me. So I think there really needs to be a real effort to be eyes wide open about how difficult it is for people to reinvent themselves, and for employers, to the extent they're going to provide on-the-job training, which is what we're hearing people really want. That's the type of education. When you have a busy life, you don't necessarily want to go to school after work or go online. I think there's a real preference for having that happen on the job and being tied to something they can see that they will do. But make sure that's very human-centered and realistic, and takes into account people's needs today. Education, I think there's a huge need. I think we've heard a little bit of the skepticism of this assumption everyone needs a BA. I think a lot of people want to see that they're studying something that they could really use in the workforce tomorrow. So being really savvy about education allows you to potentially work at the same time that you're studying, apprenticeships, very applied. So many of the jobs of the future, and especially manufacturing, do require post-secondary, require a lot of math, frankly, a lot of good analytical skills. You need that from an education system. So it's not something we talk about a lot, but I think there's a lot of pressure on our K through 12 to make sure we get math in more people, even if they don't like school and they want to immediately go out and work. You need math to be able to do a lot of these post-secondary credentials that will make you thrive in the workplace. And I think a better integration between the employers who know the future of their workforce, making sure that's integrated with the type of more professionally oriented offerings at community colleges and elsewhere.
So John, I want to ask about the role of private companies in worker retraining. So I know you have the TACO Learning Center, so you've invested a lot in the retraining your particular workers. Could you tell us a little bit about how your learning center operates, what your employee response has been, and how this has contributed?
So in the very early 90s, 91 actually, we were confronted with a really interesting situation. We were in a recession in Rhode Island. TACO at the time was very antiquated, very old, very manual. And yet we had a number of companies in Rhode Island that were quite outstanding manufacturing companies, Brown and Sharp and Cleveland Twist Drill and a number of others that for one reason or another left, closed or left. So we had on the street a high number of qualified manufacturing people, machinists and whatnot. And at that same time, we began to invest in productivity, a little bit of automation, moving towards process improvement to survive, and we didn't have a trained workforce. So the question was, do we hire what's available on the street from some of these other companies, or do we train these people? Well, we had a workforce that, the obvious answer was replace them, right? Quick. Well, my dad and I at the time kind of looked at each other quietly in a room with the door closed and said, these people have been with us a long time, they've been loyal, they've been good, we're going to train them. So I think his greatest legacy, as I look back, and he did many, many wonderful things, but I think his greatest legacy was the TACO Learning Center, because that was set up originally to teach work-related skills, English as a second language, basic math, quality programs, all of the things that people needed to grow in their jobs. But what we learned, and this is just magic, is the more people learn, we found the more they want to learn. So they began to request more. And this program became much more than workplace, job-related skill development. It became education. And to the point where we ultimately had a GED program, we had a citizenship program, went on to a bachelor's program, and now we have all the way up through a master's degree in-house. And so this now involves people's personal life, right? So now found we were drawing people's, emotions into their job, And then we created the TACO summer camps for their children, 2 art and music camps and 2 oceanography camps, which now drag their families into our company. And you see, I believe so strongly that a company like TACO, and one of the things about manufacturing that I think is interesting, is it's much broader than any one thing. We have everything from high-level management all the way through the manufacturing process. We start with nothing and give something to somebody, all the way through. This, folks, and this is why I believe manufacturing is so exciting. This is what I love about this. This little company, TACO, and I wish others more were like this, is a community. It's not just a workplace. It's doing good things for people. Our objective every day is to make it better, make the community better, provide for people. So there's a whole lot about manufacturing that isn't about manufacturing, if you will. So did I answer your question?
You did.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure. Very good answer. So
You don't really, actually, you don't really have to ask me a question. I can just go on all day.
Add one thing to that, because I think this is a really important point that Molly makes and that John just reinforced. This transition to a new job or a new job with higher skills is a very scary proposition for a lot of folks, particularly older men who've done the same job for 30 years. I've met a...
are you looking at me when you say
No.
that?
A group of manufacturers like, you know what? I don't want to learn anything new. I want my old job back. Like, that's how they see the world. So this is a hard thing. And if they don't know at the end of it that they're either going to be able to develop the skill, or even if they do, is there actually a job there, it adds to the apprehension and a very tough moment to actually learn a new skill, just as a human being. And I think Molly's point is about understanding what that's like for folks. And I think what TACO does, and Johnny's parents were the same, and he's continued this tradition with his sons, is they have done everything to demonstrate to workers in their manufacturing facility that this company really cares about you. And so when there is an opportunity or a requirement that you learn some new skill set, they're able to approach it with a whole different attitude of like, A, my company's with me, B, at the end of it, I'm gonna keep my job. And so just everyone who's been a student, you learn better in that kind of supportive environment. That is not the case for lots of workers who are often told, your job is being eliminated next week if you don't learn X and you have, 6 weeks. So, it's a very hard transition. It's a hard transition because the world around you is changing and everything they've known as a manufacturing worker in this way feels like it's changing and there's an uncertainty about what the end of it is. I think the TACO is such an extraordinary example of it's not only the right thing to do as a business leader, it's a good business decision. You heard Johnny say in passing their turnover rate is half of 1%. That's extraordinary. They invest in workers and they retain them. That's good for the company, it's good for the workers. But I think we should really understand that transition is a really hard and anxiety-filled moment for workers, and understanding that the resources the federal government provides to support that's critical, but the way it's executed and the attitude and policies of the people implementing it make a real difference as to whether or not it's successful. And TACO's, I think, the gold standard.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just to reinforce your point, in some of the interviews we've been doing, again, not with the manufacturing sector, this is more frontline service workers, when we hear that they don't feel valued by their employer, that they don't feel the company cares about them, they feel expendable already, they are distrustful of training offerings. They feel like the training is for the company, not for them. And they don't, and
Absolutely.
I think this notion that you just said, I value my employees for giving me the service, I'm gonna stick with them. I think if that message can be imparted, you're gonna have a much higher likelihood that people are willing to then put their own self out there and face their fears and take it on. So.
You know, can I just make just a couple of thoughts that I've had? One is that, by the way, on that subject, Fortune magazine wrote a little article once about TACO and about the Learning Center back in 1995. And I'll tell you what, if you ever want to go on a speaking tour, have somebody write an article about you, because I mean, it was 1 year on the road all over the place. Well, the one thing that I ran into every time I presented on this was this question: what's the payback? What's the payback? Well, I would say to these folks, I never allowed anybody to measure a payback. I never allowed it. I don't know what we gained. I can tell you what we saved by not losing people, right? But that, to me, it would just have cheapened it, right? To have somebody think I was doing this for a payback. It was just worth it. But what occurred to me also was, in '92, TACO was about a $30 million company, and we had 500 people. And now it's just shy of 300 million, and we have 500 people. And they're the same 500 people. And we were able to do that because they were engaged. They helped us grow and develop because they learned. And so we were able to invest in productivity and robotics and automation and all the things we've done without adding a lot of people, but never sacrificing jobs. The key is to keep growing, right? But that's an exciting thing for people because they do feel safe, you know. And so those are just a couple of additional thoughts, having listened to both of you.
Okay, terrific. Let's open the floor to questions or comments from the audience. If you can give us your name and your organization. Right here on the aisle. Do we have microphones? Yeah, there are microphones coming up. On cue.
Look at that.
Right there.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Mr. White, I sort of think of you as the white hat. And so my question, I think of you as being like a white hat manufacturer. I come from the Fox River Valley of Wisconsin, which is heavily paper manufacturing as well as port industries. In the 50s and the 60s, the headquarters for Kimberly-Clark was in a small town where it engaged in with the people of many of those factories. Now the headquarters is in, I think, Dallas, and the factories are pins on maps that are shifted around and opened and closed to meet a global objective. So my question is, how do you grow the mid-sized manufacturer to compete with the global ones who have a very different vision of workforce?
Great question.
Well, I would say first and foremost is to continue to cultivate the best talent. I mean, what really matters for successful manufacturers, in large part, in my view, is their access to talented, skilled workforce. And so I think, you know, there are obviously a whole bunch of other considerations, tax policy and energy costs and a number of other things. But I do think that to the extent that manufacturing continues to become more advanced, more highly skilled, more the kind of advanced manufacturing that requires higher education, all of that will give premium to a country or a city or a state that invests in that job preparedness and workforce training and skill development. So I think making sure that we are investing in developing these ecosystems so we can really compete, and that we have good investments in infrastructure and energy infrastructure to try to drive down the cost of operating manufacturing, that's also critical. And then thirdly, good trade policies so that we're not disadvantaging American-made products by having bad trade policies.
Molly or Johnny?
You know, it's a good question. So we've, by circumstance, ended up acquiring some companies in other parts of the world, okay, for different reasons, strategic, not for cost. Let me start with that, not for cost. And we haven't offloaded any jobs to different countries. To be competitive, by the way, in manufacturing, labor is not the issue. Material is the issue. Worldwide material price is the issue. And so we all outsource. We have to to be able to stay in business. But just by circumstance, we've ended up, you know, we talk a lot about thinking globally, but acting locally. So, you know, we've grown and developed geographically by acquisition, actually, more than anything else. We haven't set off jobs to other places. Does that somewhat answer was that anywhere near your question? I kind of forgot the original question.
The question focused on the fact that increasingly manufacturing is no longer grounded in the communities like yours is. Kimberly-Clark was in the 50s and 60s. It was grounded in Wisconsin
Yes.
and the Midwest. Now it's global, whatever that means.
Okay.
And so the practices and the policies that you're talking about, I don't see in my home area of Wisconsin, because they see those factories from Dallas as just pins on a map that they open and close depending on whatever their priority is, whether it's tariffs or whatever. So my question was, how do you grow, how do you make those kind of companies become more grounded in their communities?
Can I? You want to go?
No, you're the manufacturer. I just want
But you're the congressman.
No, I was just going to say, I do think there, I don't want to oversimplify, but I do think there is low-skill manufacturing, like in my state, jewelry manufacturing, costume jewelry. Like, it's very hard to imagine a big, successful costume jewelry factory in the U.S. There are some, but that low-skill manufacturing job, those are harder to keep. I think we have to acknowledge that's a reality, as compared to more advanced manufacturing that requires a higher skill set, the kind that happens at TACO. So I do think we're going to continue to see a growth in advanced manufacturing. I think the problem you're speaking about, that's a harder manufacturing operation to keep in the U.S. And I just think that's a fact. And that we can still have policies that encourage it and provide incentives. But I do think the growth of advanced manufacturing is actually the greatest opportunity for the country. It's also the scariest part, because the person who worked in the jewelry manufacturing facility that didn't have a very high skill set, it's scary to think about an advanced manufacturing job. So while that may be where the job growth is, we still have to deal with this underlying issue of how you get people ready and comfortable for that kind of a job experience.
I also think, just really quickly, Daryl, if I just, companies have the ability to become part of a community. So when I look at my company, and I'm not talking about every, I guess, but I was born and raised in Rhode Island. Rhode Island keeps consistently getting rated the worst at everything possible, as a state. And it just was rated the worst in bringing business to,
Except in congressional representation.
Yeah. Oh, no. I think I wouldn't debate with you on that. But I think that having been born and raised there, as a leader of that company, if I can call myself that, I get it. That's my community. And so let's make this a part of that community in a visible, not high-profile way, but in an important way. The people want us to succeed. If you ask people to help, they want to help you succeed. And a community will do that. That's where the government and the community colleges, by the way, have become a big part in the success of companies like mine, because they're really helping with people that are either displaced or afraid or whatever. But to become a part of the community is a very real part of the success, I think.
Okay, there's a gentleman right there who's a question.
Thank you. My name is Julian. I'm with the Strategy, Risk, and Foresight Initiative at the Atlantic Council, and I have a question for the Congressman. It's clear that every economic transformation, whether it was from an agricultural-based economy to a production-based, and then from a production-based to a service-based, and now to an automated society, creates negative externalities. In the end, it may create more jobs than it has destroyed, but most certainly not in those areas. One of those effects is that 25 cities, large city areas, create 50% of America's GDP at the moment. So you have experienced the political atmosphere here in Washington. Do you see that there is the willingness on both parties and the political climate that enables government to prepare the country for the next big transformation that is already going underway. So move people to opportunity, provide funding for this, for those necessary changes. I'd be interested to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great question. We just passed the National Defense Authorization, and actually in that legislation, I included an amendment that was passed by the House that would require the Department of Defense to do an analysis of kind of the long-term implications of automation on the defense sector to really help us, begin to have this conversation. I think the conversation has begun among many of my colleagues about what are the implications of this and how do we respond to, a lot of people talk about innovation and technological advancement with great excitement. There are a lot of people who hear those terms who get very, very terrified about their economic future. And so, at least demonstrating to them that people who are responsible in government at the local, state, and federal level are thinking about these issues. They're not easy answers, but understanding, do we need to start thinking about displacement of workers in a support system the way we do in trade deals for manufacturing, for domestic manufacturing? Like when your company goes out of business or moves, that there's a, sort of a domestic support for your transition as the same way you would if a company went overseas. So I think, on the very far left, this idea of a uniform wage in response to, a robot tax. So there's a lot of, I think, smart people that are thinking about what are the implications. I think it's important for the people we represent to at least know that their elected officials are thinking about these issues, a recognition that, these challenges or opportunities are ahead, and understanding what it's going to mean in people's lives and engage people in the conversation. I think very often a lot of what I've learned is, a lot of folks that are working in this space, they want to be sure that it's not only being thought about, that, but they're part of the conversation, that, people are listening to their anxieties, listening to their dreams and aspirations as we think about what are the public policies that respond to that. But you're right, there's not nearly enough conversation about the implications of this on the workforce broadly, and I think we have a lot of work to do.
Antoine, up here on the front row, has a question. There's a microphone coming up from behind you.
Antoine van Akmal, Brookings trustee. I was curious, if you look at advanced manufacturing, not every job in advanced manufacturing is the same. And if you kind of break it down, how much, like in TACO, how much of the jobs there are what you would call secondary school or less, post-secondary school, college, post-college, if you kind of break it down? And then where is this skills gap? I remember a study by Mark Muro here at Brookings that showed that about half of the jobs in advanced manufacturing were at the post-secondary level. So it creates jobs at different levels. What is your experience there?
That's a good. I can't break it down by percentages, but a lot of most of our jobs are in the factory, but by no means not requiring skill. Now, here's where I go a little apart from a lot of people. I have always contended that the one asset that's never obsolete are the people. Willing and able to learn, they will. And so I have yet to really confront this great skill set gap. I guess it exists. I hear about it all the time. Somebody said to me one time, a long time ago, what are you going to do when your people need to be trained? I said, train them, I guess. It's all I have to do. And through that, you can build loyalty. I don't know, that probably doesn't quite answer your question, but I still believe that I don't see the skill gap the way some people do. Maybe it's because I don't want to accept that, because I think something could be done.
So Molly, in some of the
Probably a more
sectors that you look
educated
at,
answer than that.
retail and fast food and so on, there is technology coming in. So what are you seeing, and in response to Antoine's question, what is the education requirement for those new kinds of jobs?
So I don't have looking in the rearview mirror, I remember reading a statistic that said since 2000, and I wouldn't quote me on this, I would follow up with me and I'll get the exact numbers, but my memory is that since 2000, there's been a third reduction of manufacturing workers with a high school degree or less. So they're really low skill jobs. Wow. And there's been a tripling of demand for workers with a graduate degree. So not even just a BA, but much higher. So I look at those numbers and I see, shrinking of a large workforce at the lower end, and a big spike in the post-secondary, not even post-secondary, this is post-grad level. And this was even just since 2000. So I think the numbers are pretty striking. I don't think that when we look at retail and some of the fast food, you don't see that same massive shift within the same sector. I mean, manufacturing, I think, is so compelling because of this change from being a very large source of employment for people with a high school degree or less. It has been and obviously other positions as well, but it's been a very big source of labor. And now it's shifting pretty dramatically into be a sector that really is going to be propelled by higher skilled talent. When I look at some other sectors that I'm focusing on, you don't see that dramatic shift within the same sector. So in retail, you're not seeing this sudden demand for, in the mall, for instance, or at the Target in your local neighborhood. You don't see that same change, but I think there's great potential for a shrinking in demand for the super low end of the labor spectrum. But manufacturing, I find, it has a unique place in the American economy and as a source of jobs, like clerical work. This is why I'm also focused on clerical work. Clerical work employs so many women with an associate's degree or a high school degree, and they make a stable middle-class wage. That's what manufacturing has provided to a lot of people, and there's a dramatic change happening right now in the shift in the skill set. And I think there are huge implications for that, and I don't want to sugarcoat it. It's very easy to be a policy person and say, well, we just have to do more of this workforce training. I actually think that dramatic shift is going to affect, even if we do all the workforce training out there, there's going to be a change in the workforce. Mm-hmm. And it's going to mean that people right now who have, I can picture some of the data I've done for Elkhart. You know, if you are a team assembler in Elkhart with a high school degree or less, you make so much more than the fast food worker who has that same degree. Mm-hmm. If those jobs contract, that has a huge, what replaces that from a job production? We cannot expect every single person is going to be the person who has a postgraduate degree. So I think it's a really big question on job creation. I think it's going to have massive implications, frankly. And I don't see that as much in some of the other sectors I'm focusing on. The frontline service jobs, you don't see this dramatic shift in the skill set.
Over here, there's a young man with a question. There's a microphone coming from behind you.
Hello, Will Winefield with the National Defense University Eisenhower School. I believe it was you, Mr. White, who mentioned that there are conditions present in both Germany and Japan that enable them to have flourishing manufacturing sectors while the American manufacturing sector is struggling. Can you talk about some of those conditions and about how they might be generated here?
Yeah, what I was pointing to them as examples of countries that have moved ahead with productivity, with robotics, with automation. They've enjoyed the success, and my point was merely that this is achievable. You know, and by the way, when we look at what some of those countries have done, that's coming here. It has come here. So I wasn't referring to any specific policies or just the fact that we've seen success, which is now coming this way. And it involves change. Look at Japan. I mean, when I was a kid, what was coming out of Japan wasn't certainly what's been coming out for the last 30 years. And so these goals and objectives are achievable. And it's back to the goal and objective of the fact that this is the greatest manufacturing, well, in fact, the greatest country in the world, right? It's the greatest manufacturing and engineering country in the world.
In the very back, there's a gentleman with a question.
Hello, my name is Sohail. I'm a consultant at the World Bank right now. My question is regarding labor regulations and what kind of regulations in the panel's experience it is that workers really want. What seems to be working well and what hasn't been so beneficial from a worker's standpoint specifically. Thank you.
That sounds like an academic question.
Daryl, why don't we pass this one over to you?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to say about that. In your research in looking at the local communities, what have you discovered?
You know, the issue of regulation has not been top of mind in terms of the discussions we're seeing. It hasn't emerged even in my direct conversations with workers. We haven't posed that question specifically. job quality comes up a lot. We know the extent to which you have control of your schedule. Are you getting the right hours? We ask people what they value in their job and what they want to see from their employer. Regulations has very rarely come up. That isn't to say that there aren't regulatory implications from some of the things we're seeing. But I know that there's a big conversation in my future of work world with the ways in which technology, apart from potentially impacting your job security, impacts lots of aspects of your privacy, of feeling surveilled. There's a lot of aspects of how technology is impacting the nature of work that there's a big regulatory and policy conversation happening. It's not something I'm picking up already in the field talking with workers, but I know that's something that's very much on the mind of a lot of folks like you.
I mean, the one thing I will add to what Molly said is a lot of our current labor regulations were designed for an industrial era. And so as we are moving into a digital world, we're going to need to remake regulations for the digital space. So we're seeing it in terms of worker benefits, like a lot of the tech companies classify workers not as full-time employees and getting benefits, but as independent contractors. So we need to think about that type of thing. We need to think about the job retraining components. So as we head into the digital era, those are things we need to emphasize. I think we have time for one more question. So this gentleman right here.
Hey, I'm Maxwell, and I go to Arizona State, and I have a question for Mrs. Kinder. And I was curious, and this is a problem across all sectors, but manufacturing's a big one, is there are demographic differences in racial and gender and urban-rural divides in different sectors. And if a giant wave of technological unemployment hits a certain sector, such as manufacturing, how can we prepare for negative externalities, such as furthering unequal income distributions and negative social discontent that can come from that?
You ask a really great question. And first of all, I think Arizona State, we've spent some time in Phoenix doing some work on the future of work, and ASU is really at the forefront of reimagining the role of education and lifelong learning. So just commending ASU. I think there's a huge question. It's the focus of my research is who are the communities and the individuals who are most risk for the negative externalities of automation. So you mentioned race, gender, zip code. And then there's also, so it's important to be sensitive to be thinking about who's going to bear the brunt of some of the negative. There's so many exciting positive aspects of automation. I'm not a doomsdayer. I think it's essential for manufacturing that manufacturer reinvents itself constantly, keeps ahead of the time. It's going to be a source of excellent job creation and even better jobs. But even within all that, with change, there's always winners and losers. And the implications for the losers can be pretty vast. So who are the people who stand to be falling behind, and what are then the consequences for them beyond just the job, I think is a really important question. From some of our research, we're seeing that across not just manufacturing, but across the US economy, certainly communities of color are at the highest risk, the Hispanic community being the highest risk that we've looked into. There's a bit of a difference of opinion amongst experts about whether women or men are more or less at risk. I would say if you average it all out, it's about the same, but that still surprises people because I think there's an assumption that it's men who are primarily at risk. And then there's age. So young and old are both of concern to me. And then zip code, certainly where we expect to see on net more job loss than job growth in this new world is smaller towns and rural regions compared to some of the big megacities. So there's very big distributional consequences of some of these changes. And certainly from an education standpoint, the least education is the highest risk compared to the most education. And something that we've been grappling a bit with some of the communities we're going into is, well, what does this mean? It's not just people's jobs. Jobs are very emotional. I mean, it provides so many things. I mean, we expect, what would this mean from a social cohesion point of view? What does it mean from people's marriage, their family, the next generation's ability to have a future, for things like drug and alcohol abuse, mental health? There's all sorts of ripple effects that you can imagine from a negative, but I think it's an important question you're raising is, how should we think about who stands to fall behind, and then what are the consequences, and what do we do about it? And I will just say that we've had some interesting conversations in South Bend with Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who's now on everyone's tip of their tongue. Pete has had some really interesting things to say about the way the community needs to step in for what the workforce used to provide. That sense of stability and community. It's not just from a job anymore, so there's big questions about what do we need from a community coming together, apart from just a job, to think about some of those changes and make sure we're meeting people where they are. So, great question.
Okay, we're out of time on this session, but I want to thank Congressman Cicilline, Molly, and Johnny for your contributions. So please join me in expressing our appreciation to them.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.